Hello, Internet. It's almost 2020, and that means it's about time to talk about past, present, and future, and where we are headed as a society. But first, I'd like to talk about the past. About 15 years ago, in fact. I was in high school at the time, and I had just written an essay on what I believed the future would be like. The assignment was to cover the years between 2020 and 2050 and give our predictions for what society would be like. So I focused on 4 factors. One was related to the internet, the other was related to biotechnology, then we had climate change and income inequality rounding out the 4th. So what were my predictions for 2020 and how are they holding up today? Well, let's talk about how I made the predictions just a bit before we get into it. So first of all, I'm a big believer that technological advance is first expensive. There is a lot of history to this. The advances that grace mankind are first and often adopted by wealthy early adopters before they can be adopted by the proletariat or the peasants. And my predictions are no different. In 2020, I imagined that one of the first technological advances we would see would be a type of, well, for lack of a better term, Neuralink. A device that would fit right behind the ear. Now, I was dating a girl with a cochlear implant at the time, so that was kind of where I got my inspiration for this. But the implant that I was talking about is far more sophisticated. Functionally, I was imagining a device that would have all the capabilities of a modern-day cell phone, except that they would be directly wired into your brain. Instead of text messaging, we would have telepathic thought communications. But, of course, this would only be available to people who are wealthy enough to buy in. Also, starting in 2020, the weather, due to climate change, would start to get pretty dramatic. Now, arguably this one came a little bit sooner than I expected, and really this was just my starting point, so there wasn't really a comparison to what came before. But also, we have Neuralink now. I mean, it's still in the testing phases. It hasn't been rolled out to wealthy donors and elites yet, but it's possible that within the next year it could be. 2025, I saw this technology first starting to hit a wider demographic, the wealthy upper middle class, but still not everyone. I also believe that at this point in time, we would have advanced to a point where we could reconfigure viruses as a ultimate form of medicine. Imagine a virus that could be genetically engineered specifically for your body to go inside and do nothing more but eradicate a specific type of cancer or a specific disease, ailment, anything. Just make your body stronger by editing genes or editing parts of yourself. This type of designer medicine would be available to anyone who could afford it. But again, therein lies the rub. By 2030, a considerable portion of the Earth's population has died, and that is because wealth inequality has been increasing, and at the same time, natural disasters have also been increasing right alongside it. Which means that those people who are homeless, who are out there on the streets, would have to weather these extreme weather conditions with no shelter, which would lead to the deaths of many people on the lowest tiers of our class system. But around the same time, those who survived would still have access to the advancement that I mentioned in 2020. So by 2030, about 10 years later, the type of Neuralink software that I originally envisioned would be available to the entire world. However, at this point, what is offered to the wealthy and what is offered to the poor is very different, because we're getting the 2020 version while they are living in 2030. Of course, this has been the way it always has been. By 2035, we've begun to engineer artificial organs, the first of which is an add-on to the brain. Now, this would effectively replace the Neuralink software that I mentioned before, giving us an organic organ within our body, a biological computer that would functionally be like a software upgrade for our own brains. Now, this is kind of the part that the income inequality becomes scary to me, because at this point, all the things that racists have long said about race would now be true for differences in class. There would legitimately be a class of people that were almost infinitely smarter than the general population, and it would be a biological difference as well. By 2040, advances in medicine have increased to the point where we have created an additional organ that works in conjunction with the one that I mentioned for 2035. This organ would replace something like the pancreas or the gallbladder or the appendix. Okay, maybe not the pancreas. We might need that. This would have the ability to engineer viruses for instant self-protection instantaneously. The mental add-on would be constantly scanning our body for irregularities, and it would send data to this secondary organ within our guts that would be able to create viruses that would instantly heal us. In fact, even allowing our body to regenerate. Now, this is kind of the part of science that in science fiction has traditionally been done by nanomachines, but honestly, in my theory, we skip that entirely. Why build machines when we can work with what we already have? When we can work with the pieces that already work well with our body? But by 2040, most of the income has been accumulated by the top. There is no longer a middle class. It is completely gone. There is the 90% of America and the world that is dirt poor, and then there's the rest of us that can afford the advancements in technology that I'm mentioning. It would take until 2050, until I imagine that nearly 80% or more of the population, generally the poor, are dead. Because since 2040, the wealthy have had the ability to regenerate. So even injuries and damages caused by a shifting climate or extreme weather could be weathered by them. But the poor, well, they have no such luck. But by 2050, all of the technological advancements that I've mentioned so far are available to everyone who survived. Although everyone who survived at this point is pretty much at least 50% those who were rich enough to survive. And the other 50% are simply those who were lucky enough to make it, or to live in the right place. To me, this highlights why we need to change our system, why we need systems like an expanded Medicare for all, or a public health system that allows these advancements in technology to be rolled out among everyone, and not just those who can afford them. A few years later, in college, I was exposed to the book Radical Evolution, which first taught me about a man named Ray Kurzweil. Now, as it turns out, Ray Kurzweil made a number of predictions that are actually very similar to the ones that I just laid out. I'm not going to go into his prediction in their entirety, but he's an interesting person to look up if this video leaves you curious. In the book, it's basically organized into 3 parts. The first part of the book, which was written around 2008 or some such like that, talks about the various advancements that have been made by DARPA, which is a part of the government that does advanced research and technology. For example, one of the examples laid out in Artificial Evolution is a monkey whose brain was wired to be able to control a computer, or at least be able to control a mouse pointer on a computer. These were the ideas that would lead to something like Neuralink, that would lead to the advancements that I've mentioned earlier in this video. And here's the thing. We are already living in the future. The problem is, the future is constrained to those who can afford it. And this is the major problem. The second part of the book focused a little bit more heavily on Ray Kurzweil and his predictions for the future and other futurists' predictions for the future instead of just the present. The third act is what I want to talk about in this video. By the third act, we have already been introduced to an idea called the singularity. The singularity is a point after which it becomes very difficult to predict the future, because things will advance so rapidly that our imagination of them is only now about as accurate as asking someone from the time of Jesus Christ to predict what the 21st century will look like, even though the singularity could be happening in 10 or so years. I believe Ray Kurzweil predicted that it would happen around 2050, near the end of my predictions. And likewise, this is where Kurzweil's predictions stop. But what if singularity is already upon us, and we just haven't realized it yet? See, there is one major advancement that's happened recently that I believe could be a harbinger of this singularity that Ray Kurzweil spoke of. So, let's talk about Google's quantum computer. See, regular computers and encryption and the thing that keeps our data safe across the internet, the thing that governments use to protect their data, our data, citizens' data, and public data from being hacked by any government willy-nilly all around the world, is encryption. And encryption only works because a traditional computer would take hundreds, if not thousands of years to be able to decode the exact encryption that we use. Now, quantum computers throw a real monkey wrench in the works for this. You see, Google's claiming that their computers can crack these sorts of codes that would take a traditional computer thousands of years in only about 3 days. Now, I would be amiss to say that there aren't people who are skeptical about this. IBM specifically, which has built a similar computer, says that their computer could do it in hundreds of years instead of thousands. And that at best, Google's computer is probably doing it in 2 or 3 years, not 2 or 3 days.
Big oof, big yikes. Unfortunately, I messed up the timescales quite a bit here, and I am at the studio, not where I have my green screen, so I can't really fix the video portion. But let me just clarify by saying that Google is claiming that their computers can do in seconds what a normal computer would take thousands of years to do. IBM's counterclaim is that their computers can do it in years instead of thousands of years, but that Google's best would probably be in the scale of days, not seconds.
However, as you can see, this is still an increase in speed of a factor of hundreds, if not thousands, over even IBM's technology, which was already an increase of tens, if not hundreds, over traditional computing. What this could mean is that a company like Google, and a government working with them, could essentially render all encryption completely obsolete over a matter of days, maybe even a year. In fact, if they started working when the announcement that their quantum computer was ready, they could hack the entire world very easily by the end of 2020. And this would change everything. But that's just the implications of hacking. Can you imagine what kind of simulations a computer like this could run? It could simulate every person down to a level that they would be able to predict exactly how we would react to anything based on the hordes of data that we have already given them through the social media age. They would be able to make plans and strategies that would completely nullify our opinions and differences. They could absolutely control us. This brings me to the third part of the book of Artificial Evolution, which talks at length about our future. It talks about 3 scenarios of grappling with the singularity, only one of which is favorable. First, I'm going to talk about the heaven scenario. Now, the heaven scenario is something that I like to think of as kind of a lawful good type alignment scenario. It is one in which technology has increased and become incorporated into our lives such that we can no longer resist the power structures that exist within our world. That for the sake of peace and harmony, governments, corporations, anyone who has the power to do such, has reduced our free will and our ability to make decisions to the point where everything is peaceful. But it's exactly the peace that they want. We no longer have free reign over our future. Instead, it is decided by an increasingly small handful of people who are at the reins of the technology that controls us. This is the heaven scenario. So, as you can imagine, the hell scenario is even worse. Now, the hell scenario has already been imagined by science fiction writers in various ways. One of the best ways to describe this, and probably the metaphor you've most likely heard, is the Paperclip Factor. It's the idea that at some point we will build a machine designed to make paperclips. We'll be governed by an AI, and we tell the AI to turn raw materials into paperclips. But what happens when it runs out of the raw materials that we give it to make paperclips. The AI has only one goal, and that is to make paperclips. So it will begin to assimilate any raw materials it can until they become paperclips, turning this world, us, animals, pets, trees, into an endless source of paperclips. This parable is a warning about poorly designed AI, and thankfully, some people are actually heeding this warning. But it only takes one misstep. It only takes one poorly designed paperclip factory to doom us all. And that's the scary part of the hell scenario. But the third scenario, the one that Kurzweil himself championed, was called the prevail scenario. This scenario rides the line between the two. It's one in which we don't make the mistakes that lead to hell, and we have enough control over our society that we do not end up in heaven. Instead, we merge with our technology and we become greater. Greater than we could ever imagine. Greater than we could ever predict. It is my opinion that we can only reach the prevail scenario through equality. Because the rampant inequality, the income inequality that I mentioned in my earlier predictions, would only lead to a heaven scenario. It would only lead to a state where only the most wealthy have control, and the rest of us become subhuman as they ascend to a godlike state to rule over us. And that is why it is more crucial now, this year, and the years coming forward, that we strive for actual democracy, that we strive for equality, that we strive that all humans are treated the same, no matter how many zeros happen after the dollar sign of their net worth, how many commas they happen to have in that number. We must abolish ideas like currency and capital that create artificial divisions within humanity. We must tear down unjust power structures wherever we see them. And if we are not diligent in this, we can very easily find ourselves in heaven or even hell. So, it's a bit somber. But my New Year's resolution and my New Year's hope for this channel, for society, for all the people watching, is that we can become a part of that better world. That we can make it possible through our collective efforts. Because we may only have so much time left. And this issue could be more immediately pressing even than climate change. Although, as I pointed out, if we don't tackle that, 80% of us could be dead by 2050. I mean, we've already seen this in the widespread extinctions that have wiped out most of the species on Earth by far that existed in the last century by the beginning of this video. So, we have a very real decision to make. What type of future do we want? How will we get there? And how much will you fight for that change? Thank you for watching. And I'd also like to give a shout out to my Patreons who are helping me feel more equal in a society where I have eschewed the traditional advertising models that generally create income for content creators like myself. Instead, I ask that you donate any amount of money to my Patreon page to help me survive in an increasingly unequal world. Now, I understand that due to this inequality, most of you don't really have spare income. But if you do, consider donating even $1 to my cause so that I can continue to make videos like this, so that I can continue to bring you the news stories into the new year that the media absolutely won't cover, as they focus so deeply on stories like the impeachment or any controversy surrounding. Instead of focusing on these singular stories, we need to see the world as it happens around us. We need new media platforms to be created. We need to give a voice to those who are voiceless. And that is my goal. So again, thank you for watching.